Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Special guest, Alec Empire from Atari Teenage Riot. Alec, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You've been very vocal on the issue of copyright and on the issue of anonymous. Let's start with copyright. Do you think the ACTA, SOPA, PIPA, etc. are the fight against fascism of our time?
Yeah, I think this was always a very complex discussion. Where does creativity start? Where does it stop? And what my fear is that all those laws are being used at the end of the day against political blogs, and against freedom of speech. To me, that's the direction it's heading. So whenever the government tries to protect my music or something with men with guns, it's I have doubts in that.
Well, guns was in my next question. When the RIAA, the Recording Industry Association of America, when it justifies sending goons to shake down single mothers and kneecap grannies, they say they're doing so in order to protect artists like yourself. Your thoughts?
I often never received that type of money, from that stuff. I think they protect the powerful in that industry. That's the only thing. The system is set up to protect those, and I think the majority of artists never really gets their fair share. So I don't really trust that type of strategy, at all. And also I'm thinking there's so many big corporations who steal from the artists rather than, some kid in a bedroom. It's kind of absurd to me to use that kind of force on an issue like that.
It seems like the dynamic is changing somewhat, and the argument that they are protecting the artist is wearing thin. Now you write, quote, "I came to the conclusion that men with guns employed by the government can't and won't protect me from situations like this in the future." You are writing about your experience with Sony, stealing your own music. Tell us about this big corporation.
Yeah, it was crazy. Over 10 years ago, I got this VHS tape from a team that was doing a documentary on Nine Inch Nails, a tour they've done, and we toured together at that time. So they recorded an advert in Asia where our music suddenly appeared for a camcorder, and I was furious. I was like, they never had the permission to do that, and then it was crazy to fight this in court because we are a small team of people, an independent label basically, and a band. So, how do you go about this in Asia? And it was, got kind of settled. But we speak about all these topics in our songs, so a lot of politics and stuff. So suddenly, when you see a song appear in an ad, the whole thing is compromised and corrupted, and it loses its meaning. So it's about much more than, getting a few $1,000s or something, you know what I mean?
So, Alec Empire of Atari Teenage Riot, when you guys started out, really, it's 20 years ago now.
Yeah, the first record we released about 20 years ago. It was a white label. Also interesting, it was hard to get music out back in the day, so you did press vinyl, and there was almost a very independent network starting with the techno scene, the underground scene, and nobody argued about copyright and things like that. It was get the music out, get the message out, sell this stuff if you can, and network with other people, while the major record labels really almost stopped that innovation from happening. And if we look at music now, this was the most important innovation probably the last 20 years. It was hip hop and techno music, so, and this stuff, DJs were using records, creating new music from that. So, it's that feeds right into that debate is, where do you draw that line, because I think you can be so strict about everything that music just doesn't move forward. We see it. I think we see on one side the major record labels who are so backwards and so putting out very boring music. And to me, that is the problem of the music industry crisis. That they are stuck. Not only the way they're selling music, but also just the music they are pushing. It feels like in the 60s or 50s even sometimes to me. You know, you see some woman, some blonde woman like singing a ballad, while online, you know, there's so much going on with like the dubstep scene, like in the underground, like people using noise, you know, like hip hop stuff. It's so much more exciting, you know, but it is not being recognized enough, you know, by the industry.
Now, Atari Teenage Riot, when it got started, there was a political edge to it. There was a lot of the songs were anti-neo-Nazi at that time, anti-fascism, you could say. And during this period of time, these 20 years, while facing toward the enemy from the previous generation, there's a new enemy kind of crept up behind us, behind you guys, behind the musicians. It's a new fascist regime with these the hardcore technocrats. Now, so politically, is the circle coming around? Does your audience see it this way? That there's a connection politically, what you were talking about 20 years ago, and this technocratic regime, if you will?
Yeah, I think, you know, what was interesting, like we started shortly after the Berlin Wall fell, you know, and I think I've seen so much like in Eastern, you know, socialist Germany, you know, in terms of like surveillance, the way technology was used to spy on people. And I think this is so relevant now to many people because like the way technology is used or, you know, abused by those in power is, you know, it kind of goes into that direction, you know, like the, you know, if you look at Apple or Facebook or, you know, those types of companies, it's almost like they want to build their own zoo, you know, which is integrated, you know, in the internet or whatever.
Well, they call it a walled garden.
Yeah,
right?
okay.
That's his password is digital rights management. It's in their walled garden, and the access to these places is becoming expensive.
Yeah, and to me, that's the death of, you know, that idea, because it's, you know, we should be able to connect with each other and exchange information. You know, and if that is not happening anymore, you know, what's the internet worth? Is it becoming another form of television almost? You know, that's how it feels sometimes.
Right, cable TV, where it's pay-per-view. Now, you've donated your fee from Sony using your song to Black Flags, to the Anonymous Defense Fund.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about this. Is this part of a strategy of fighting back, and how can musicians like yourself now fight back?
Yeah, you know, to me it was like anonymous, like there was so many activists who helped us, you know, spread the music, and because we wrote about, you know, basically the Bradley Manning case and WikiLeaks, we wrote the song called Black Flags, and we had so much support. So when this thing came up, like I was able to place that beat, like sneak it into an ad like a few months ago for a handheld device that Sony was starting to sell and to promote. So I was like, okay, so for me personally, it was a little bit like a revenge thing that I was able to put exactly that track into that ad. And, you know, I thought, okay, this money would be, you know, could be used very well, you know, in court, because I think everybody should have the right to defend themselves, you know, and to afford the right type of lawyer. So I was like, okay, you know, the moment it arrived on my account, I was like, okay, I'm going to transfer it on. So, you know, I was kind of getting a lot of angry phone calls and emails since then from those guys, but, you know, whatever.
Well, you mentioned the redirecting the funds, and of course, redirecting funds is big with, let's say, the Julian Assange and the WikiLeaks site. Of course, the banks around the world shut him out. The credit card companies, the PayPal, shut him out. So just moving money around becomes a political act.
Yes.
Now, going back even before the Berlin Wall, let's go back to the 1960s.
Okay.
Music at that time, of course, was instrumental in stopping the Vietnam War.
Yes.
And it was really politicized, because in the 50s it was very Lawrence Welk and not very political at all. And then the 60s came around, it was highly politicized, and it fed right into that anti-war movement.
Yeah.
So here we are in 2012. There is a digital war going on. Atari Teenage Riot is really digital hardcore. You more or less invented digital hardcore. So is the war on? I mean, you've been called into the war. Is this really has your music ever been more relevant or more essential?
Yeah, you know, like I think this is really about the artist taking the power back, you know, and I think, yeah, we're facing an industry which is really hostile towards us, and also the freedom of speech thing, you know, like, I mean, we've seen it with when the Iraq War started, you know, with the way Dixie Chicks were bullied, you know, by radio stations, like the record industry. And I'm like, if you're not allowed anymore to write a song about, you know, how you feel about certain things, like music is also becoming so boring. To me, the most exciting music was created, for example, in the time you mentioned, you know, end of the 60s, you know, I think the music industry still draws from that a lot, you know, like especially in the UK. It's almost like they're constantly looking back to that time,
right.
You know, so, and then I think the same with punk rock, you know, end of the 70s, which reflected the crisis in society back then, and I think hip hop, you know, we would have never heard about many of the racism and stuff like that in America if it wasn't for hip hop music.
You mentioned hip hop. You were just at Coachella. You performed, and Tupac Shakur, the hologram of Tupac, performed. So this is a new chapter in the digital copyright phenomenon. They've resurrected from the dead, essentially, a hip-hop artist who's performing. This is perpetual copyright. Tupac is never apparently eternal, but his royalties will continue, and presumably they can create new Tupac music at some point. How do you see this developing?
To me, it's almost like it's like a metaphor, you know, of the industry. Like it's like walking zombies. You know, it's like either you have like puppets. Or if you have to do stuff like that, of course, there's the fascination for the technology, maybe that people go, oh, this is even possible. But then I'm going, okay, you could, you know, have pre-recorded a video or something with the message or whatever. To me, I wasn't that blown away by that thing. I have to say, I was like, okay, good. Was that musically exciting to have somebody from the past like?
In your contract going forward, would you have a clause in there that no holographic Alec Empires to be performing after your death?
Yeah, at some sort of election campaign party or something. Yeah, no. If we need that, I guess I have to do that, right?
All right. Well, we're out of time. Alec Empire of Atari Teenage Riot. Thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Alec Empire of Atari Teenage Riot. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.